My cellmate asked, "So what are you in for?" I sighed. "A 30-story building I built. It drifted away." He let out a sharp laugh. "That's bullshit. I'm a construction guy. Buildings don't have wheels. They collapse, they crumble, they crack, but they don't drift." A guard making his rounds overheard us and chimed in as he passed. "He's telling the truth." After the guard left, a quiet fell over the cell block. "Sure, buddy. Keep spinning that yarn," my cellmate, Frank, said with a smirk, clearly unconvinced. I just grinned, lay back on my bunk, and folded my hands behind my head without saying a word. A minute later, Frank couldn't stand it anymore. He shuffled over and sat on the edge of my bunk. A steel and concrete high-rise weighs tens of thousands of tons. This isn't some fantasy novel. How does something like that just drift? Tell me the story. You do, and my next dessert is yours. I chuckled, decided not to drag it out. I sat up, leaned against the cold wall, and began. The site for my project, it used to be the ocean floor. They landfilled it years ago. You could dig down 100 feet and not hit anything solid. The ground was just fine, soft muck. No different from a swamp. Frank nodded, thinking, "Yeah, that's coastal land for you. The deeper you go, the more the dirt feels like Play-Doh." "But," he added, his eyes narrowing, "if you're putting up a tower, you've done your geological surveys. The engineering firm's calculations would have accounted for the environment, and their blueprints would have been reviewed and approved up and down the line. By all rights, a building like that should be sitting on hundreds, maybe thousands of piles driven deep into bedrock. Godzilla himself couldn't move it. And even if you skipped the piles, the building would sink, not drift." The other inmates in the cell had stopped their own conversations and were looking over at us now. I took a deep breath and started from the beginning. Back in May of 2018, the company landed a new contract in Port Cypress, Florida. A huge deal, a $100 million investment. My company had never handled a coastal project before, so this was our big break. As a project manager with 20 years of experience, they put me in charge. When I got to the site, I realized the situation was far more complex and dangerous than what the developer had described in the bid documents. The lot was massive, about 10 acres. To the west was a public highway, but the north, south, and east sides were all bordered by roads that were still under construction. To make things worse, 2 high-voltage power lines cut directly across our property line. The working conditions were a nightmare. But those were the easy problems. I'm an old hand at this game. After a few steak dinners with the developer, the city permitting office, and the local zoning board, we got clearance to cut an access road from the Western Highway, and the utility company relocated the power lines. The real monster was the ground itself. It was far worse than anyone imagined. The official geotechnical report claimed the site was a tidal flat environment, with a top layer of standard landfill over deep beds of silted clay. But when I brought in a long-arm excavator, I found nothing but pure sludge from a foot below the surface all the way down. I asked around with some of the locals. Turns out, the area had been reclaimed using dredged mud from the bottom of an old fish farm. In other words, my construction site was, for all intents and purposes, a saltwater marsh. To even get our equipment on site, I had dozens of dump trucks bringing load after load of crushed brick and broken concrete just to create temporary access roads. Less than 2 days later, even those roads were sinking into the muck. If my gut was right, and it usually is, the entire geotechnical report for the project was a complete fabrication. Back in the prison cell, Frank sucked in a breath. A fake geo report. You mean from day one, following the blueprints was the wrong move? He scrunched his face up. I've never heard of something like that. Why would they do it? I threw my hands up. How should I know? There's a million things in this world that don't make sense. Digging into the why is pointless. The bottom line was the report was wrong, and we had to figure out what to do next. Frank asked, "So what did you do?" I let out a short, bitter laugh. "What do you think I did? I reported it straight up the chain to my boss. You think I'm going to make a call like that on my own?" Frank leaned in. "And what did your boss say?" The situation on site was grim. Our temporary roads, built from tons of construction debris, were swallowed by the ground under the simple weight of workers walking and supply trucks driving over them before we could even reinforce them with rebar and a concrete slab. I called a meeting with the project's engineering and technical departments to go over the geotechnical report. After we all confirmed it had to be fraudulent, I immediately contacted the client, the developer. Faced with the undeniable facts, The developer's reps flatly denied the report was fake. So, I had no choice but to call my boss, Mr. Thompson. I laid it all out for him. Thompson, this project is a goddamn minefield. After listening to my whole rant, he just said, cool as a cucumber. Keep going. You don't stop walking just because you see a pothole up ahead, do you? I put my foot down. There's no way. We can't build on this. That's when he let me have it. Leo, I sent you down there to be a project manager, to solve problems and make this company money, he screamed through the phone. And you're calling me with this petty bullshit. What have you been doing for the last 20 years? He took a breath. I don't care what you have to do. Figure it out. All I need to see is a 10% profit margin for the company. Anything you make above, that is yours. I hung up the phone with a deep sense of satisfaction. That was all the assurance I needed. Frank was rubbing his chin, more intrigued than ever. So how did you solve it? I grinned. I organized 2 expert validation conferences, flew in a bunch of senior engineers, university professors from architecture departments, and execs from the design firm. After extensive review, I continued, my voice dripping with sarcasm. They concluded that construction was impossible under the current conditions. We formally requested that the developer issue a change order to the design. Add cement soil mixing to stabilize and harden the ground. Cement soil mixing is exactly what it sounds like. You inject and blend cement directly into the soil to solidify it. Frank asked, did the developer agree? I sighed dramatically. After endless haggling, they agreed to add 50,000 square feet of soil stabilization, but they'd only pay for 30,000. Frank's eyes lit up with understanding. I get it. So you only did the 30,000 square feet. You guys would never do work for free. I burst out laughing. Wrong. I didn't do a single square foot. We pocketed the money for all 30,000. Frank stared at me, his jaw slack, in a site office conference room. The team had just finished reviewing the revised foundation plans. Whether it was 50,000 square feet or 30,000, it was a drop in the bucket for a 10-acre site. I took a sip of my coffee. Lock the door. Kevin, you stand guard outside. With our junior engineer watching the door, I turned to the 30-odd managers left in the room and said flatly, we're not doing a single square foot of that stabilization. The chief project engineer was stunned. Leo, if we don't do any of it, how do we proceed? How do we even start the foundation? 30,000 square feet of cement soil mixing at a 25% cement content, 4 yards deep. Our finance guy calculated that at about $1.4 million, I said, raising my chin. Have any of you considered how much profit that is? The chief engineer couldn't help but interrupt. Leo, that's a project cost, not profit. We can't build without stabilizing the ground. Another employee chimed in. He's right, Leo. How can we cut that corner? If we don't harden the ground, we can't even dig the foundations. Hell, you can't even stand out there without sinking. Leo, we can't skip this step, can we? I slammed my hand on the table, making everyone jump. I don't know what your previous project managers taught you, I said, my voice cold and hard. But on my projects, you will have cost consciousness. You spend money where it counts. And what counts? What the client can see is what counts. The room was dead silent. I scoffed. Who's going to see the cement mixed into the mud under the ground? How much does it cost us to host a PR event? Invite other firms and stakeholders for a tour. A few $1,000, right? How much to bring in water trucks and keep the dust down, make the site look clean? A couple hundred? How much for some new banners with corporate slogans on them? Pocket change. Bang, bang, bang. I pounded the table for emphasis. I scanned their faces. Even if you take the client's reps and the city inspectors out for a steak dinner and slip them an envelope with a few grand, it's a fraction of the cost. To be successful in this business, you have to be cost-conscious. Don't waste money on things nobody can see. The staff under me didn't dare breathe. After a long, tense silence, the chief engineer finally managed to choke out a single question. But Leo, it's all mud. People can't even walk on it. How are we supposed to build anything? 7-inch, yeah, how did you do it? Frank was getting more and more curious, pulling his legs up to sit cross-legged on my bunk. If people can't walk, how are you getting heavy machinery in there? I smiled. Who says you can't work in mud? If people can't walk, you lay down plywood platforms. If the excavator can't drive, you rent steel road plates. And how much does it cost to buy some plywood and rent some plates? a tiny fraction of the alternative. Frank was dumbfounded. No way. I mean, yeah, we use road plates all the time, but if that was a solution, wouldn't the developer know? Why would they ever approve $1 million+ change order for stabilization? I laughed out loud. You give the client-side guys too much credit, Frank. They're rich, yeah, they're elites, but they sit in air-conditioned offices all day. What do they know about the down-and-dirty tricks we use in the field? Laying down plates is a pain in the ass, sure. But as long as you keep the inspectors and the client's on-site rep happy, that $1.4 million is ours. Frank just shook his head. You greedy sons of bitches. You really know how to make a buck. He thought for another moment, then frowned. Okay, but even if you skipped the surface stabilization, you still had the deep foundation. The structural piles tied into the foundation slab. With all those piles holding it, there's no way the building could move. Don't tell me you didn't sink a single pile. If that's the case, the inspection agency wasn't just crooked, they were blind. We drove piles. Over 3,000 deep-drilled shafts, in fact. The local building code was strict. They had this digital tracking system that required a photo at every major step. Before drilling each hole, before lowering each rebar cage, before pouring the concrete. For a dozen different steps, the foreman, a worker, and the inspector all had to be in a time-stamped geotag photo together. But there was one thing the software couldn't track. The concrete itself. From the outside, you can't tell the difference between 3,000 psi concrete and 5,000 psi concrete, especially when that concrete is being poured hundreds of feet into the ground. Oh, Frank said, his face lighting up with dawning horror. You substituted a lower-grade concrete for the high-strength stuff, so your piles weren't strong enough. That was just the start of it, I said, getting into the story. According to the design specs, we were supposed to use a special Treme concrete for underwater applications. We swapped it out for a standard mix. The savings were enormous. Frank gave me a thumbs up. You guys are diabolical. Then he asked, but what about testing? When the testing agency came out, they would have caught that the pile strength was garbage, right? I snorted. Dealing with them? That was the easiest part. The local regulation says they have to randomly select 2% of the piles for core drilling to test the concrete strength. For the rest, all piles have to pass an ultrasonic test to check for integrity, to see if there are any breaks or voids. So, we had the concrete plant send us a few trucks of the good stuff. We poured about 100 perfect by-the-book piles scattered around the site, specifically for them to randomly find and core drill. Then we took our own ultrasonic gear and pre-tested every single pile ourselves, making a list of the ones that were actually solid. The official testing agency is required to videotape their entire process to ensure impartiality. So we had them out to the site the day before the official test for a pre-inspection walkthrough. We made sure they knew exactly which piles had our little markings on them. The next day, all they had to do was put on a show, retesting the same good piles we'd already identified for them. Piece of cake. Jesus Christ, Frank muttered. How much did you guys make off a scam like that? I held up 3 fingers. Frank's eyes went wide. 300,000. I shook my head. Then stop playing games. How much? Frank demanded. 9 after all my creative accounting, cost-cutting, and efficiency finding. When it came time to distribute the year-end bonuses, our project had cleared over $4 million in pure profit. As the project manager, I naturally took the lion's share, $3 million. Of the remaining $1 million, the chief engineer, production manager, finance manager, and safety director each got $200,000. The regular staff got bonuses ranging from $20,000 to $40,000. After half a year of bitching and moaning, the entire project team was suddenly buzzing like they'd been hit with a cattle prod. With my $3 million bonus, I set up a generous scholarship fund for 2 underprivileged female university students, covering their tuition and living expenses for the next few years. The other managers took their $200K and bought new cars, put down payments on houses, or blew it on booze and women. The rank-and-file guys with their bonuses finally had enough for a wedding or just a little more sway with their wives at home. Everyone had a bright future. The company group chat was flooded with messages frowny face thank you, Leo. Leo is the man. I'll follow Leo to any project. 10 Frank just shook his head. Running a project like that, it was bound to blow up in your face. I nodded, snapping out of the pleasant memory. Yeah, when we came back after the new year, it already had. Frank leaned in, tense now. What happened? I said grimly. Our surveyor was checking the coordinates for the basement foundation slab. He found that one of the sections, a 10,000 square foot slab, had drifted 2 inches. That's a code red. Frank gasped. Forget drifting. At this point, you could tell me the building flew away, and I'd believe you. I just have one question, he said, locking eyes with me. With a disaster in progress like that. He spoke each word slowly. How did you manage to keep building the rest of it? 11 after the holidays, the construction workers were still trickling back to the site, but my management team was already back in the office. The first thing they did was line up to wish me a happy new year. I was all smiles, handing out $100 bills as a little welcome back gift. Then they all went back to their desks, and all hell broke loose. Peterson, our surveyor, burst into my office, looking like he'd seen a ghost. Leo, bad news. The foundation slab for Sector B, over by Clearwater Drive, it shifted 2 inches to the west. He was in a full-blown panic, and he'd dragged the chief engineer in with him. Years of putting out fires on job sites kept my own heart from racing. What are you panicking for? I said, lighting a cigarette. The sky isn't falling. What's the problem? Peterson caught his breath. Leo, I was out there setting points for Sector B, and something fell off. I rechecked the GPS coordinates multiple times. The entire slab for Sector B has moved 2 inches west. Clearwater Drive was the road under construction along the east side of our project. Sector B was the easternmost portion of our foundation, with Sector A to its north and Sector C to its south. I took a long drag from my cigarette. That's a huge discrepancy. You have reshot your benchmarks, right? Peterson nodded frantically. That's the first thing I thought, that I'd screwed up. I recalibrated and measured 3 times. I exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, grabbed my hard hat, and told Peterson and the chief engineer to walk the site with me. The reality was even worse than I'd imagined. Before we started excavating, we had driven a perimeter of shoring piles around the entire foundation pit, with support beams connecting them to hold back the surrounding earth. But we hadn't done any soil stabilization on the east side, and the earth there was as soft as liquid. The shoring piles, which were supposed to stand straight like a fence, were now visibly leaning westward, pressing directly against the foundation slab of Sector B. The result, the entire 10,000 square foot slab had been pushed 2 inches off its mark. And by the looks of it, the pressure was still building. If this continued, we were looking at a total collapse of the pit. Forget finishing the building. I'd be going to prison. Peterson asked, his voice trembling, Leo, what do we do now? I took one last, hard pull on my cigarette and immediately laid out a plan. What plan? Frank was practically bouncing with anticipation. Your whole site was about to collapse. How are you only in here now? Shouldn't you have been locked up years ago? Settle down, I said, my voice calm, just like it had been when I was talking to my surveyor. I got comfortable on the bunk and continued my story. The moment I confirmed the problem, my first priority was to cover our asses. Frank's eyes bulged. How the hell could you cover your ass on that? It was entirely your fault. I chuckled. Frank, if you don't know how to pass the buck, you've never really worked in construction. First, I had my chief engineer draft an incident report and a root cause analysis. The cause, naturally, was that Clearwater Drive, on the east side of Sector B, had experienced heavy construction traffic over the holidays. The vibrations had caused soil liquefaction, increasing the lateral pressure on our shoring piles. This caused the piles to lean west, making contact with our foundation slab and pushing it 2 inches with horizontal force. Frank gave me a slow clap. That is some prime-grade bullshit. A road under construction just happened to have heavy traffic during the holiday shutdown. So what? I said with a grin. I slipped the project manager for Clearwater Drive a $50,000 consulting fee, and he swore up and down that his trucks were running all holiday long. It was his project, so he couldn't get in trouble for it anyway. Then, we hired our experts for another conference. 20 grand apiece. All they had to do was sign off on the cause and effect analysis we had already written for them. Just like that, the problem was officially no longer our problem. You are one stone-cold bastard, Frank said, shaking his head. He thought for a second. Okay, so you covered your ass. What about the foundation slab? It's still 2 inches off. The blueprints don't match. You can't just bend the rebar sticking out of the slab 2 inches to make it fit, can you? You idiot. You changed the blueprints. I laughed. If you just shift the building on the drawings by 2 inches, everything lines up again. Frank smacked his own forehead. God, I'm an idiot. Been locked up too long. I forgot the basics. Just then, one of the other inmates who'd been listening and chimed in, confused. Isn't that like shooting an arrow and then drawing the target around it? Frank roared with laughter. Kid, that's how every industry works. From the dawn of time, the product gets finished, and then the as-built drawings are made to match. Only students think people actually follow the rules. We shared a good laugh before Frank got serious again. So what happened next? The engineering firm must have issued drawings for a fix, right? Did you have to excavate the road to relieve the pressure, or install tieback anchors, or add more bracing, or just finally do the soil stabilization? I nodded. They did. You know your stuff, Frank. They issued a design for a series of tieback anchors to pull the shoring wall back. Frank leaned in close. So did you install them? I just smiled. You've got to be kidding me, Frank said, his voice rising. You didn't, did you? I stayed silent, letting the grin do the talking. Frank was losing his mind. Leo, I'm calling you Leo. All right, stop messing with me. Your pit was caving in. You were one step from a jail cell. Did you reinforce the damn wall or not? Reinforce it? Reinforce my ass. I was standing at the head of the conference room table, jabbing my finger at the revised blueprints on the projector screen. Do you have any idea how much these anchors will cost? How much time we'll lose on the schedule? The chief engineer looked pale. Leo, the shoring wall is actively pushing on our foundation. The slab has already moved. We have to reinforce it, don't we? Are all of you brain dead? I roared, slamming the table again. 30 tie-back anchors will cost us $300,000. Who's paying for that? Huh. Wouldn't that 300 grand look better as bonuses? Which one of you got less than 20 grand last Christmas? I tell you people constantly, we come to this miserable job site for one reason: to make money. The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. Finally, the chief engineer broke the silence, his voice barely a whisper. But Leo, if we don't reinforce it, won't the slab just keep drifting? I shook my head and sighed, as if explaining something to a child. I told you have to use your brains on this job. I pointed at the screen. An 80-pound weakling gets knocked over with a little shove. A 300-pound lineman can get hit by a truck and not budge an inch. Right now, our Sector B foundation is that weakling. You push it, it moves. So what we need to do is build the damn superstructure. Once you have tens of thousands of tons of buildings sitting on top of that slab, you think it's going anywhere. Godzilla himself couldn't move it. The chief engineer's face had gone white. Leo, if the developer finds out, what do we do? I smirked. Finds out. We're accelerating the schedule, cutting down the project timeline. If the developer finds out, he'll be thrilled. He'll probably give us a bonus. Someone else asked, but Leo, what if it shifts another inch or two while we're building? I scoffed. 2 inches, 3 inches, what's the difference? We call the engineers and tell them to change the drawings again. Make it 3 inches. Problem solved. The chief engineer grit his teeth. Leo, this is too risky. It's against every regulation in the book. My face turned to stone. Let me tell you something. The things you read in textbooks, the rules in the code books, those are all dead things on a page. If you want to make real money, you can't let that stuff hold you back. The safe, easy, profitable jobs, those are for other people's kids, not for us. If you want a new car and a new house, you do it my way. And so, we immediately started work on the main structure, pushing the schedule, pouring a new floor every 3.5 days. Holy shit, Frank breathed. Leo, you are one of a kind. I gave a slight bow. You flatter me. Frank thought for a moment. So what happened? Did the foundation slab keep drifting? It moved another ½ inch, then stopped, I said casually. Just like I said, as the building got taller, its own weight pinned the foundation down. It couldn't have drifted if it wanted to. Frank frowned. Now I'm really confused. Didn't you say your building did drift away? But now you're saying its weight pinned it down. Did it drift or not? Or was it a different building? I sighed. It drifted. This exact building in Sector B. It drifted by 100 feet. Frank's face was a mask of confusion. But it moved an inch when it was just a slab. So how did it move 100 feet after the whole building was on top of it? The familiar sense of dread washed over me again. For that, I said, We have to go back to those shoring piles that were pressing into our basement. Frank smacked his head. Oh yeah, I forgot about those. The piles that were leaning into your foundation. How did you build the basement's exterior wall with those in the way? Simple, I said. We had the design firm change half of the blueprints. Frank scratched his head. What do you mean half? Why not all of them? I shook my head. The half we changed was the reinforced emergency shelter. That section had to be jointly inspected by the developer, the city, our team, the engineers, the fire department, and a federal agency. It had to be perfectly by the book. In that secure zone, you can't cut a single corner. Even I wasn't stupid enough to mess with that. For that section, we revised the drawings, shrinking the basement wall inward. It cost the developer 3 parking spots, which was a loss of about $100,000. They told me they were deducting it from our final payment. Frank asked, and what about the half you didn't change? The half we didn't change was the non-secure, general use area of the basement. The regulations there were more flexible. We still held a meeting, of course. We made a decision as a team. Only this time, the meeting wasn't in the conference room. It was out on the site, standing right in front of the problem. I brought the chief engineer and the whole technical and engineering department out to brainstorm solutions for the encroaching shoring piles. These shoring piles are 30 inches in diameter. The chief engineer began, pointing. Right now, they're intruding 4 inches into our basement wall footprint. If we were to grind 4 inches off the face of the piles, they would no longer conflict. We could use a hydraulic hammer to chip away 4 inches, then patch the surface smooth with cement. He was talking sense. I was proud. He was finally learning to think more about cost and efficiency. If everyone on my team could think like this, we'd all be making even more money. Someone else spoke up. But what about the waterproofing membrane? The groundwater here is salt water. It's highly corrosive. We can't waterproof on the inside, or the rebar will be rusted through in a few years. Okay, then let's grind off 12 inches, another suggested. The main tower is already up, with its weight holding everything down and the foundation slab pinning the bottom of the piles. They aren't going to move any further west. Good idea. Yeah, that works. That gives us an 8-inch gap. That's enough room for a worker to get in there and apply the membrane. When we backfill, we can throw some heavy plastic sheeting over the membrane for extra protection. It'll hold for a year or two, no problem. And after 2 years, someone else snickered, if it starts to leak, well, that's after the warranty period expires. Not our problem anymore. And just like that, a plan was formed. The 30-inch diameter shoring piles, intruding 4 inches into the basement wall, would have a full 12 inches of their concrete and outer rebar hammered off, creating an 8-inch workspace. I nodded, satisfied. See, you're all learning to use your heads. Just one more thing, I added. Tech department, write up a technical memo. State that this entire issue was caused by the construction on Clearwater Drive next door. It has nothing to do with us. However, if the client wants a superior waterproofing solution, we can offer to fill the gap with foam concrete. If they agree to pay for it, we won't cut corners on that part. We'll have a clear conscience. Frank was in awe. You magnificent bastard. You trained every single one of them to be just like you. He started ticking points off on his fingers. Okay, so now you've got this multi-thousand-ton concrete and steel monster. It's not sitting on an ice rink. To the east, you have your shaved-down shoring piles and a road under construction. On the other 3 sides, you've got the rest of your basement foundation. Your building is, at the very least, buried in the ground. Even if you didn't have a single decent pile under it, it couldn't just climb out of its own hole and drift away, could it? Ah, I sighed, the memory becoming clearer and more painful as I got closer to the end. Here's the thing. That road to our east, Clearwater Drive. By all rights, that entire roadbed should have been stabilized with deep soil mixing for 30 feet down. But the bastards who built it were just as crooked as we were. They hardened the top 6 feet, dumped some gravel on it, and called it a day. Frank's eyes widened. So you're saying, to your east, the road was a hard crust over a pit of mud. I nodded slowly. Frank was still puzzled. But what does that have to do with you? Even if their road collapsed, it would fall into your sight. Your building was lower than their road. How could it drift out? Because, I said, my voice low, on the other side of Clearwater Drive, a new project had just started, and they dug an even bigger hole, just as we were topping out the main structure of Sector B. The project next door to our neighbor started construction. This new project had a 2-level basement, a full 25 feet deep. Our project only had one level, about 15 feet deep. And if we were crooks, and the guys building the road were crooks, the guys on this new project were the kings of crime. They also drove shoring piles, but they didn't do an ounce of soil stabilization. And into that unstable mess, they started digging. A massive pit, over 150 feet long, 100 feet wide, and 25 feet deep. Their plan was to pour the entire 16,000 square foot foundation slab in one continuous go, instead of in manageable sections. The result was catastrophic. One by one, the shoring piles on the new project buckled and snapped. The unstabilized mud under Clearwater Drive, the road separating our two projects, began to flow like water into the massive new pit. There was nothing anyone could do to stop it. No one dared even try. It was a chain reaction of failures. The ground beneath Clearwater Drive vanished faster and faster, until with a great sucking sound, the entire road slid into the neighboring project's pit. Our project's basement was 15 feet deep. The new project's pit was 25 feet deep. After the road between us collapsed into the hole, our basement wall was no longer underground. It was now a ground-level wall, completely exposed. And as the last of Clearwater Drive slid away, something terrifying began to happen. Frank was silent for a long time. "A story for the ages," he finally whispered. "Truly, a story for the ages." After a moment, his eyes shot open. "Wait, your Sector B was connected to Sector A on the north and Sector C on the south, right? And the rest of the foundation to the west. It was all tied together. It shouldn't have been pulled away." He still couldn't wrap his head around a building literally drifting away. I gave a bitter smile. "You're forgetting. We fast-tracked the tower on Sector B. We rushed it to the top to pin the foundation down. Because our piles were garbage, the settling under Sector B was much faster and more severe than the rest of the site. After we finished the tower, it had already sunk by several inches. Sectors A and C didn't have towers on them, just landscaping and planters. They barely settled at all. The expansion joints between the sectors, the ones designed to handle a little movement, had sheared apart long ago. The steel water stops were torn, and the rebar connecting them was bent and broken. We never bothered pouring the concrete to seal those joints. The entire Sector B, tower and all, was its own isolated island. After Clearwater Drive disappeared into the pit next door, panic consumed our site. Everyone's face was ashen. Then the cavalry arrived. The city building department, zoning board, county officials, fire department, police, news reporters, the district attorney, the state investigators. Everyone. The only stroke of luck was that our project was in a new development zone on the outskirts of the city. There weren't many residents nearby. The news was immediately blacked out. Not a whisper of it made it online. My chief engineer walked right up to me and punched me square in the face. "Leo, you son of a bitch!" he screamed, tears streaming down his face. "You did this. You've ruined us all." I didn't even have time to react. I just ran from the office to the edge of the site. And then I witnessed the most unbelievable thing I have ever seen. The foundation slab of Sector B, with the 30-story tower sitting on top of it, was sliding under the force of its own immense weight, pulled by gravity toward the lower elevation of the collapsed road. The shoring piles we had shaved down snapped like twigs. The 200-plus garbage piles underneath Sector B offered no resistance at all. Slowly, inexorably, it drifted. It slid across what used to be Clearwater Drive and came to a rest in the pit of the new project next door. With a deep, grinding boom, the new project, which had only just finished digging its foundation, now had a 30-story high-rise. No one dared get close. All the police and firefighters could do was create a perimeter and evacuate the area. Watching it happen, only one thought crossed my mind. I'm done. Our project is done. My company is done. Frank was quiet for what felt like an eternity. Finally, he let out a long, slow breath. "You know, the crazy thing is how many chances you had. If you had just stabilized the ground properly, the shoring piles never would have leaned. You wouldn't have had to cut them, and the slab would have stayed put. If the slab hadn't drifted, the expansion joints wouldn't have failed, and the other foundation sections would have held it in place. If your foundation piles had been built to spec, the tower would have been anchored to the bedrock like a mountain. If the Clearwater Drive project had stabilized their roadbed, the road never would have collapsed. If the new project next door had excavated properly, none of this would have happened. But all three of you, each one more crooked than the last. Frank looked at me and asked, "Do you regret it?" I nodded. "Some of it." "How much time did you get?" 10 years. It wasn't just me. Our whole project team went down. The client, the inspectors, the engineers, the survey company, the testing agency. People from every single entity involved got time. After hearing my whole story, Frank just kept shaking his head. 22. 10 years later, I got out. By then, my wife had divorced me, and I had no idea where my son was. With all my professional licenses revoked, the only work I could find was manual labor and making food deliveries. I worked like a dog for another 10 years and finally scraped together enough for a down payment on a small condo. I wanted to share the news with someone, but I had no one to call. So I stood on my new balcony and dialed an old number. I called Frank. We were both old men now. We talked for a long time, catching up. "So, where are you living now?" he asked. I told him the name of the condo development. Frank's voice suddenly turned into a panic scream on the other end of the line. "Get out of there. Run. I built that development." "What?" I yelled, and in that instant the floor beneath my feet gave way. The entire balcony cracked and sheared off the side of the building. Boom! I hit the ground with a sickening thud. As the world dissolved into darkness, one final thought echoed in my mind. Damn it! In my next life, I swear to God I'm following the blueprints. End.